Tom Frenay, K1KI. And so you should be able to, yep, and you can see them on the feed for those of you who are remote. And without further ado, I think I'm going to,
Let each one of them introduce
Exactly.
themselves.
so please introduce yourself and, oh, got this coming around. And then we'll go into opening statements. So,
Pick one candidate
Fred.
first.
Oh, Tom, go ahead.
All right, good. I don't know. Greetings. Tom Frenay. I live in Connecticut, about 10 miles from Springfield, Mass, right along the Mass-Connecticut border. And glad to be here. I don't think I've been to the Neshoba Valley meeting, but I've sure been to a bunch of your field day efforts. And I know a lot of you helped out in the
Microphone.
WRTC event that had a lot of stations in Devens 5 years ago. So I'm running for director because I'm not happy with how things are going with the ARL the last few years. I can talk about that a little bit more during some of the questions that Phil has posed. My background is that I actually worked in Newington when I was a few years younger. Not too long out of college, I ran the contest program there for 4 years. Had an interesting time, a great place to work for somebody trying to have a job that they enjoy doing. So Newington was an interesting place, a lot of interesting people. It's not a place to go to make your fortune. I did that after spending a year in Antarctica as a radio operator. Did that for over winter at one of the research bases there as a contractor that worked for National Science Foundation. So those were my two introductions to working life. After that, I went on to work in the insurance industry for 20 years in IT, dealing with the newfangled personal computers. And a whole bunch of network control technologies. After I left ARL, while I was working for one of the insurance companies in the Hartford area, I decided I wanted to run for the ARL board, and I successfully got the job as New England Division Director. And I did that for quite a number of years. Until 3 years ago, I lost by about 40 votes. So I'm here, I'm back to say I haven't liked what I've seen the last 3 years, and I'm interested in getting back on the board and trying to finish some of the stuff that was going on 3 years ago that has not been accomplished the last few years. And I don't have a clock, so I don't know if I've hit my 5 minutes.
You're still okay.
Okay, so I'll go a little bit further. ARL has had a number of CEOs in the last 5 years after K1ZZ retired. Dave was a tough act to follow. He was very knowledgeable about everything ham radio. Unfortunately, the folks we've had since then haven't been as good. I guess the best way to describe it. The third different CEO started last fall and has been there for less than a year. I'm still trying to figure out if I think he's doing a really good job or not. He's certainly better than the other two and better than the interim one that we had. So I think we're headed in a better direction, but I think a lot of ground has been lost the last several years, and I'm looking to get back involved in that because we have work to do, and in answering one of the questions here, I'll get into that. So back to you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
Can I
it.
interrupt a second? Move the microphone closer to the candidate. The audio is very low.
Actually, Bruce, would you mind just moving your laptop like midway over, maybe just between the two candidates? Maybe that would work.
Yeah, that'd probably work better.
And then I'll
actually.
just come over and ask questions, and that way everybody will hear.
All right, let's,
So, stand by.
the wires here are gonna be,
That's all right, we'll get it.
This is a wireless hobby, right?
yeah, exactly.
Except for when it isn't.
So let's do this. Let's put this there. The first thing we'll do is this one. That goes on the far side.
You want to do that on the honors over there, Tom? You can probably see it better than I can.
Can I do it? Well, let's see.
All right, we all set? Do we need power here, or are we good on that?
Fuel? Yep, you just need the cable.
And tilt the screen down a bit so you're not covered
No,
up.
no, and below your feet is another power cable for the
Right,
laptop.
so let's just do that. Oh, and this is the power for the laptop itself.
This goes on this
How many engineers does it take?
computer.
That's why I'm a scientist.
No, it goes back here. This goes.
All right,
All right, can you all hear us better now?
Much better.
All right, great.
okay, so, Fred, you're up.
All right.
By the way, for the rest of this, my magic yellow paper will let you know when there's 1 minute left.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, great. All right, I'm Fred Kemmer, AB10C. I live right up the road in Hollis. This is probably the shortest trek I've had to a club meeting yet. So that's kind of nice. I'm sorry, could you say again? They're a little bit hard to copy.
Yeah, and here's the problem, is that this computer is capturing what's going on,
Okay,
as opposed to this one.
okay. Can we just
So-
maybe use this computer? Is that going to work? We just kind of tilt the laptop toward
The
whoever's
problem is we
speaking?
have to pull it out.
Yeah, maybe we could.
You want to do that?
Yeah, you know, I'm looking at it, the image that we're projecting right now, it actually looks pretty good.
That's good.
Can you all see us okay? Is that going to work for everybody?
Yes.
All right,
Okay, let's try that.
all right, let's try that. All right, I'm Fred Kemmer, AB10C. I'm an extra class amateur radio operator. I think we need a director that's going to tackle a broad range of issues. There are a lot of challenges that are facing the future of amateur radio in the ARRL. And we need directors who can handle the full range of stuff at once. We can't afford specialists anymore. Some of the things that are important and top of my list, we need to work on bringing people to amateur radio, and almost more importantly, actually getting the people that we bring in active and on the air. We're not doing a good job of that. I'll say some more about that as we go. I also think investing in young hams is really important for a couple reasons. First of all, we need to bring the next generation along, and more importantly, that's the best way that I know of to build public support and awareness for amateur radio. And we critically need that if we're going to protect spectrum and protect our rights as hams in things like HOA situations and other things. There's a lot we need to do to improve public awareness and support. Emergency communications and our engagement with agencies that we serve are a key part of that process as well. We have a lot of work to do. And quite frankly, the league has a lot of work to do a better job of public relations and get the word out there. I think it's super important that the board work to provide enough budget and resources so we can hire top people and that the people in Newington have what they need to be successful. I was glad to see a number of questions along those lines. I think you all are spot on there. You know, one director can't address a broad range of issues by themselves. There's nobody that I know of that's active in so many different things in amateur radio that they can handle the full scope of things at once. I think it needs to be a team approach, and it needs to be a lot about collaboration on two different levels. First of all, I think that no matter how good of a job the ARL does in creating programs, they cannot execute what needs to be executed without all of you. Clubs, individual amateurs and amateur radio have to buy into whatever our path is forward and make it real. And so I'm very much about not only focusing on the internal process in the board and the league, but simultaneously creating a process to get all of you involved and get you to be part of the solution. And that's going to do two things. It's going to speed things up, and it's going to create a situation where you all are actually buying in and supporting the work, as opposed to wondering how in the heck did those crazies come up with that? Which is kind of what's happening now on some key fronts. Two-way communications and candor is really important. You know, when I came up here, I had the job of straightening out a botched up acquisition of a company up here that my company had done a terrible job with. And had it not been for candid communications and acknowledgement about the problems and a willingness to take on people's concerns, all my employees would have left within the first 3 months. So I have a strong feeling about the importance of good communications because I've lived it firsthand many times in my corporate life. Speaking of that, being a director is a pretty important job. I've spent about half my career, maybe a little more than that, in business executive leadership roles some of them at C-levels, basically officers and corporations. I've had a lot of experiences on both sides of the board equation. Both being a board member and trying to get people on the board aligned to do things. I was responsible for setting the agenda for an industry communications board called the ADIS board. That had all the mobile operators, all the cell phone and equipment vendors in the world. And I can tell you that if you think there are problems with getting people aligned to the ARL board, you ain't seen nothing yet. My job on that board was to create common ground and get people to solve problems. I was good enough at it that they eventually paid me as a consultant to do it when I didn't work for my company anymore, okay? I've also been on the other side of the leadership role where I had to be accountable to a board as a chief technology officer for a pre-startup company in Texas. And I can tell you that that working experience is pretty important too. And I think I have a good appreciation for the right balance between the two. So with that, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you very much, both of you. That was very helpful. Okay, so for the people online, I'm going to appear behind these folks, ask the question, and then disappear.
Okay.
Just because I know that microphone is working. So, from the voice of authority behind you.
Hang on, aim it towards.
Yeah, that's okay.
There we go.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, you're fine.
Great, okay. So the first question has to do with RF spectrum, which has been referred to already. I'll read it out. RF spectrum is ever more valuable for commercial uses, and the free market prices its use accordingly in a way that does not favor general use of spectrum in the manner allowed by amateur radio. So the question to each of the candidates is, how specifically will you work to improve ARRL's track record in defending amateur allocations, and how will you specifically increase coordination with national agencies, FCC, NTIA, others, in a manner that ensures the voice of the amateur is heard? And in particular, what things do you think are now broken in this area that have to be fixed? And so we'll alternate people going first. I'm going to have Fred start, and then we'll follow with Tom, and then we'll reverse for the next question. So 4 minutes for each one of those. Go ahead, Fred.
All right, thanks. So this is one example of where public support and awareness of amateur radio is really critical. You know, we've had a lot of good work to try to move the FCC, write bills for Congress. Can anybody think of anything that got passed or got actually results? Anybody think of one thing? So what's wrong there? Well, some people say it's about lobbying. The ARL isn't doing a good enough job of lobbying. Well, you know, I looked this up. In 2019, all the major telecom operators spent $67 million on lobbying. 32 million of that was spent by Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile, the very people who stand to benefit the most from our spectrum. If I look at the total cash chest that the ARL has, with 18 months, if we try to beat them on money, we will be out of money, okay? So lobbying, while it's important and we can do a better job on that, is not going to get us through this problem. We need public support and pressure. Now, I'll tell you, I spent about a year of my working life as a member of the FCC Technical Advisory Committee. That was a group of industry experts whose job it was to work with the FCC on projects to help them set public policy. Two things moved the FCC. Pressure from the mobile operators and their vendors to basically increase broadband access, and public pressure around security, reliability, and public service goals, things like access to broadband networks for low-income people. So you tell me, which one is going to work for us to protect our spectrum? Is it going to be the lobbying and we're going to go up against the wireless operators? Or are we going to have to move public support to protect our spectrum? Now let's get specific. The two bands that are next in the target are our 5 gigahertz and 10 gigahertz bands. Why? Because there's enough bandwidth there to make them attractive. There's 275 megahertz available in one contiguous slot on 5 gig, and there's 500 megahertz available on 10 gig. That spectrum, if parceled out to both the two-tier satellite operators and the 5G mobile operator, is worth billions of dollars in revenue, okay? Lobbying and participation in the FCC TAC, and I'll come back to that some more, what we can do specifically there in a minute. But if we do not use those bands better, we will absolutely lose them. There's no question about it. And we all know, and I know there's a lot of expertise on the SHF and above bands in this group, you know it's not easy to use those bands, especially on a daily basis. I've been working on a project with some hams in Maine around building an RDEN network on 5 gigahertz that has a potential to put a good significant amount of everyday traffic in 5 gigahertz. It's very doable. There's already a small backbone working in Maine. We've got a project going where we're trying to create a plan to make that a New England-wide network, use it to link repeaters, backup for emergency communications and public service, and also do some video stuff. If we do that, I think we could go to ARDC and get a grant to fund it. What we need is a good plan to do it. And to get that plan, we need clubs and some of you to collaborate together and help us figure out how to engineer that. This is an example of the type of projects that I want to start as director that are externally facing, that are about work that all of you can do to make these situations better and help. So the league's got a role with the TAC, lobbying, and public support. We'll talk more about that as we go. And I think you all have a role to play here too.
Okay, thank you, Fred. Tom, you want to, turn the microphone.
Sorry, Tom.
You have 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Fred covered some excellent points. It's very difficult to keep Spectrum when you can't compete money-wise. And Fred is absolutely right that ARL is not in a position to compete money-wise with the big telecom companies. And the spectrum we have is prime target for that. We've already lost access to 3.3 to 3.5 gigs. And it's slowly being phased out for us, but another year or so, I don't think we'll be there at all. And he's right, they're looking at 5 and 10 gigs. We've also had some problems at 2 gigs. The microwave spectrum is a serious problem. The way to counter that, one way to counter that, is with the hundreds of thousands of hams speaking up and talking about ham radio and communicating to the general public what we do. I've been critical over the last couple of years that the league has not done enough to make the public aware of what amateur radio is doing these days. And the best way to describe that is to tell you that there's a job opening in Newington right now for a public relations manager. It's been open for a year and a half. A year and a half. That's crazy. You can't leave a position like that open because, number one, we need to tell ARL members what we're doing and what's happening across the country, but we need to be able to find good stories to tell the general public and get those stories out to the appropriate places. So we've lost the ability to get out information. The best example of that is Hurricane Ida. Hit Louisiana about 10, 15 days ago, less than that. Made a big mess of Louisiana. A lot of hams were involved in doing support work there. And if you look at the ARL website, you'll see almost nothing about what's taken place. Maybe a month or two from now, we'll have some stories in QST or elsewhere, but just the fact that we can't even report on it in near real time is a real problem. We've got to be able to tell the story, and we have to do it quickly. Even ARL board meetings, they take place and it takes weeks for the results of those to come out. For example, the mid-July ARL board meeting, the minutes of that only came out about 2 weeks ago. We can argue about whether they did anything useful or not, but communication isn't there. It's really not good. We really have to do better. And I know that with COVID, it's been a problem getting in the door to talk to people at the FCC. The building is still closed. But that doesn't mean the telecom companies weren't doing something. They're on the phone, they got email, they got other ways to contact the appropriate people at the FCC and in Congress. But the ARL, as best I can tell, sent one delegation once 2 years ago, and that's been our effort. So I'm pretty unhappy with that as well. And I think that was my sign that my time is up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Oh, by the way, this is 1 minute left, just to clarify. So,
Okay.
if you see this, you've still got a little bit of time, but thank you
We'll
very much.
over-deliver and run under budget. How's that sound?
Hey, thanks very much for those responses. Those were very thoughtful. I'm back. So number 2 question here is, in fact, again, was referred to in one of the answers. Lack of direct communication with the members has been a recent issue in Newington. How will you specifically work to increase transparency at the ARRL board level for the membership? And we'll reverse this, so Tom, you have the floor for 4 minutes.
I think I'm going to do it right. All right.
Right.
Oh, you're first? I'm sorry. Go ahead. Excuse me.
You got to
Yes,
listen.
we're going to switch.
Sorry.
Okay, thanks. Well, as I said before, public relations manager's job is open. That's a big strike against getting information out. One of the things that I've started to voice when I was on the board last time was that the articles about ARL board meetings don't have enough information. So you really have not much idea of what the arguments were about, what the dissent was about, what the positive was about, and how the board came to whatever conclusion they came to on a particular issue. And encourage the third CEO back to try to write some articles that were much more clear about board activity and the policies that the board has adopted and the strategies that the board was using for ARL. That really hasn't taken place, but that's an important thing that that the board itself has to recognize and do. The board also needs to be able to remember from meeting to meeting what they actually did and what they asked the headquarters staff to do and which things were accomplished. That's something I have done for the last 15 years for the board, and I still do it even though the board doesn't care about it anymore. But they need to know what is it was promised to be delivered by the following board meeting so that we can actually have some accountability. So I think that's a very important thing. The impact of Zoom is very important. You can see from this meeting and all kinds of other meetings we've had the last couple of years that this kind of communication with members is not going to go away. I don't know, Fred has said he wants to do a lot more with Zoom, and I will commit to doing the same kind of thing, because we've got to get the word out. It's not just something where you just tell people to go look in QST in a couple months to see what we did. It's important. We've in the past done surveys of members on topics. We haven't done that much of recent. The last one I can remember, a serious poll on anything, a serious survey, had to do with the entry-level license a few years ago and on band planning. Entry-level license, I was involved in that one because I chaired a committee of the board to look at the entry-level license and make recommendations to the board. And one of those recommendations was that we do a survey of members, which we followed through on. We had a pretty extensive survey. We got, what I had hoped were going to be 1,500 responses, and we got 8,000 responses. So we heard from people. They really gave us some good ideas. They confirmed some of the things we had been thinking, but they also gave us some new things to think about. So it's very important to, from time to time on important issues, make sure that members are included and ask for their opinions, because surprising to some people, there's a lot of members out there with more than the board knows. You have to listen, because there's some incredibly diverse opinions and backgrounds and expertise that the board needs to take advantage of. And all of that's important because in the end we have to make our arguments in front of the FCC and in front of Congress, and unless we have a good background for the things that we're presenting and a good basis for it, then we're going to have a difficult time selling to the people that regulate ham radio exactly what we'd like to change. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Rick?
Okay, great, thanks, Tom.
Same amount of time?
Same question, okay. All right, so transparency and communication, this is one of the things that my near-death experience with the startup company that brought me to New England taught me. When you have tough problems, you need a leader who's candid and going to be straight with you, because that's how you build trust. We've lost a lot of member support and trust in the ARL. I've heard this everywhere I go, that people don't trust the ARL, we're not communicating. We had a big discussion about this out in the parking lot on the way in here again tonight. Transparency for me starts at home. So here's how I'm going to do it in New England. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to try and do to help get the board on the page with us. First of all, transparency is about listening. You work a lot more stations by tuning the bands and listening than you do by broadcasting. Okay, there's way too much broadcasting going on and figuring out how to spin what's being done, and not enough time being spent listening to members, trying to understand what their concerns are and figuring out how the hell to take action on that. I've already held one town hall meeting where I've had about 100 people in New England show up with questions, and I took the time to work with my team of people who are helping me formulate good policy on all those issues and do my damnedest to try to address them and start thinking about how being responsive. If you elect me, you'll see that happen at least 2 times every single year. We're going to take that input, and I'm going to make sure that at the beginning of every cabinet meeting, which I plan to hold 4 a year, and note there are only 2 board meetings, which means we're going to be doing a lot more in my cabinet than just board stuff. We're going to start the meeting by having a readout on the feedback we've gotten from the last town hall and online, and that's going to set the stage for what we work on. That's how you create responsive policy. And if things are important to the members, we're going to be doing our damnedest to figure out how to address those issues. And if we can't do it all inside the ARL, then we're going to work across members and clubs and groups in New England. We're going to try to solve the problems that way too. It's going to be a dual approach. Now let's talk about what the ARL needs to do. Some committees, and as you probably all know, or you'll find out as we go through this, a lot of the real work and policy making in the board gets done through committees that the board creates. A few committees are starting to publish detailed notes about what's going on in those committees. If I ever get the chance to chair a committee, and I'm going to work real hard to do that, we're going to make damn sure we do that every single time. That's how you set an example about being transparent. Directors can audit the work in committees. I am working very hard to understand the top set of issues, and myself, Assistant Director Phil, who's on the call, or Vice Director, I should say, and my assistant directors will audit every single one of the committee meetings that's important to you, so we know what's going on there, and we're going to look for opportunities to get people in New England who are experts on those areas appointed to the working groups under those committees so that they can have, and you can have some say into what gets decided, okay? I think the board should use roll call votes for every single important action passed. That's not a very popular thing to do. You don't make a lot of friends with your director peers by insisting that people are on the record of how they voted. But you know, when we do something like subsidize youth licensing or other activities, you'll have a right to know how people voted, okay? And I think that's really, really important. Maybe if we do a good enough job with our town meetings, maybe some of the other directors will pick up on that and hold some, or maybe some people will run against them and do what we did. Maybe the CEO, God forbid, might hold a town hall meeting and stand up to the members. Wouldn't that be an event? And finally, the board needs to place more trust in the staff and the CEO for regular communications. There's way too much micromanaging of those communications. It makes the ARL appear slow, and it scares the staff about saying what they think needs to be said, so that's not good either.
Thank you very much to both of you. I'm going to move on to another question, but I think we're going to return to some of the staff issues in the last question. So now I'm going to switch a little bit, having to do with membership and education. So the ARL has a lifelong learning program. It's been advertised for a couple of years now, but no actions seem to have come out of it, at least none that we can tell. How will you specifically address technical learning and knowledge improvement in the population of adult licensees, given the explosive pace of development in areas such as software-defined radio? We will switch once again, so Fred, you have the floor.
All right, great. We don't have to turn the laptop. You know, learning and training is something that's very important to me. Those of you who know me know that I've been spending a tremendous percentage of my time for the last 5 years developing training material through a program that you all actually started here called Tech Night. We took that program and ran with it, and it's become a tremendous source of training. So what did I learn there? Well, I learned that members can create really high-quality training content if they put their mind to it. And you know, by the way, the Lifelong Learning Program actually has a library of some pretty high-quality videos. Unfortunately, our website is so poorly done that both Tom and I tried to find this today, and neither of us could. Okay? So and we're going to get into IT issues and other things here in a little bit, so we'll talk more about that. But and that's a self-inflicted wound. It's not for the lack of the effort to create the material. It's for the lack of having a good mechanism to make it available that people can use it. We do have just recently a new lifelong learning member, a manager. His name is Steve Goodgame. He is a very much grassroots, member-developed, content-oriented individual. He's also very good at what he does. I have great hopes that he will pick up this charge of having member and club-developed training content and use that as a way to quickly build an effective library. There are some things that need to be done in common. He needs to set the agenda for the topics. Things like SDRs and advanced technology would be high on my list. But if we're going to have board members that are going to not stick their fingers in what the staff is doing, you have my commitment that I won't play there other than to try to make sure the guy has the support he needs to be effective. I also think that that person needs to set some guidelines for how that content is produced. We need to set time limits, format limits, and so on, so that it is reasonably effective and can be consumed in a reasonable amount of time. I think the tech nights that you've done in the past and other clubs have done should be a key source for this material, and I would encourage you to be paying close attention to what Steve does and try to get on board when that opportunity presents itself. I also think Eris Academy, which was done at Ham Exposition, is another great example of really high-quality member-based training that the ARL should be falling all over themselves to embrace and distribute. You know, and by the way, we're going to get into this on the licensing topic, but you know the number one reason that so few techs, by the way, only about 25%, best case of the people who get a Technician license will ever be on the air and active. And you know what the number one reason is? We did some surveys on this. It's because they can't find mentoring to help them get on the air. So how important is this issue actually? Maybe it's a hell of a lot more important than we realize. It's not just about providing skills development for folks who've been in amateur radio, but it's also equally importantly about taking the people who do the work to get a license and actually making them successful hams. And a great deal of what training gets produced here needs to be focused on that. You know, another example, some of you are probably familiar with the Ham Boot Camp program that we created recently here and deployed. And I think that's a good model for how a lot of this stuff gets done. We had a group of people develop the material. The ARL did a wonderful job of helping us promote that through articles in QST and all the publications that they have. Do you know that we put 750 people through Ham Boot Camp, a basic Get on the Air program, in the last 3 years? That we've got participation from half the states in the United States and outside the United States as well. That's an example of how you all can work into the process like this and make a real difference. And we need more projects like that, and we also are going to need clubs to collaborate on some of them and work together to make them happen. And a big part of what I'm going to be about as your director is creating an environment and people whose job it is to encourage you and work with you to do that kind of thing.
Thank you, Fred. Tom, you have 4 minutes.
Okay. It's interesting that Fred and I both went looking for lifelong learning today.
That's
and
pretty
we
sad,
learned, and we learned something. And the interesting thing is the lifelong learning program was something that the board started up 4 or 5 years ago when I was on the board, when we basically set up the process to hire somebody to specialize in lifelong learning. And you know, I think he was right out of college, if I remember correctly, out of graduate school, and had some experience in developing courseware. That got approved in 2019 with the goal of going live in 2021. And you may have been hearing about it for a couple of years, but that's only because we were talking about it in the future. But theoretically, it went live this year. The problem is going live didn't make an impact clear enough to actually find it easily on the AR website. I mean, if you find some areas where there's information for new hams, there's information about MCOM training materials and a couple of other things, but just the list of things that have been presented under lifelong learning this year is hard to find. It's really discouraging. So a lot of the discussions we had before this project was started up were between 3 different areas. One was, do we have to develop stuff ourselves, number one, and there were good arguments for quality control. And then there was look at all the stuff that's on the internet, why can't we just adapt some of that and license it and so on? And that was a very positive source as well. It's actually improved a whole lot since then. So there was a lot of discussion about that. And then the I'll call it the almost death knell to the process is it's an IT project. And an ARL, an IT project, is a difficult thing. We have never had a good IT department, and I say never, from the TRS-80 that I used when I was the contest editor to today. We've had a difficult time all along with technology, which is crazy since we're a technical hobby and we do so much everywhere with technology. But IT is something we don't do well because we don't manage it well.
Oops, could someone mute themselves online there, please?
Thank you.
Thanks.
So that's a real key thing in dealing with not only lifelong learning, but all projects at ARL, is you need to have a quality IT staff. Fred talked about one of the things, a couple of the things he's been involved in the last few years. One of the things I like to talk about is a program we started in New England 25 years ago called the Get on the Air program, and it was to match up new hams with clubs so that we hoped that clubs would take over and mentor new hams. And because it was, besides the ones that might have come through their VE program. We did that to a pretty good success for a couple of years, and then talked the ARL board and the ARL staff into adding it to Field Day as the Get on the Air station in Field Day. So I'll call that a real world example of the same issue that Fred has been working on, which is how do we get people on the air once they're licensed? Because the return rate is not good enough. We have people that are taking the time to get licensed, and for some reason, we don't bring them along to the next step, which is to getting to know us and getting on the air and trying some different pieces of ham radio. And I think that's the key piece that's missing and needs to be in the lifelong learning program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Okay. I'm going to now switch a little bit, and this is a combination of something that I had asked and a question that Rod had sent in, WNTAC. It also mentions IT. So you've all brought up IT. I think that you can speak to that as well. What's your view on whether the ARL should be providing and ensuring long-term survivability of key amateur software packages widely used for training in handbooks and other materials, such as EasyNEC modeling? Roy Llewellyn, W7L, has stated he's retiring and will not be supporting the software anymore. And should in the process, ARL be ensuring that the software is multi-platform and open source compatible? So I will let you address that. Tom, I think we're with you first. 1 minute.
Okay. Good questions. The first thing that came to thought when I saw that question was when I worked at ARL 30 years ago or so. I actually wrote a couple articles, and one of them had a Fortran program that went with it. There was an article about how do you create a great circle map that shows the shadow of the sun, because it was of interest to me because I like to DX, and it's very important to know where sunset and sunrise is and so on. So I wrote a short article about it. I had an article, I had a link so that somebody could get the actual code for that. And I'm sure Fortran still exists and people still use it or try to use it. It's not the world's favorite language anymore. But that's something that ought to be preserved or could be converted to a more modern language. I heard about the EasyNEC modeling issue a few months ago, and I know I heard there's some discussions on the ARL board about it, actually, because it's a very popular piece of software that's used by a lot of hams to model antennas. I don't know that the code is for sale, and I think that's been one of the issues, because you can't just assume that the author will do that. I mean, this code itself can probably be adopted by somebody and made perpetual so that amateurs could use it. But I don't know that, and that really is an individual question for whoever wrote the software. But I think that's the kind of thing that's important for the league to be able to look at and make some choices about, and maybe even talk about publicly as to what works, what doesn't work. Because as you all know, not everybody here is buying a new antenna book or handbook or whatever every year, and there are some references to software in there that are key to some of the sections of those books, and it would be perfectly reasonable to maintain the code base behind a lot of those examples and projects. So I think it's important just for the long-term longevity of the usefulness of QST and other Should it be something that the ARL ensures is multi-platform and open source? I don't know, that would be ideal, but in reality, those resources aren't in Newington. Those resources would need to be contracted out, and some people in the amateur community could choose to do that, or we could choose to hire people to do some of that. It's not like they're not good ideas. It's a question of what resources are available. So in general, I like the question. I think it's a good thing to for the ARL to be considering.
Thank you. Fred?
All right. So software development is something that I've had a great deal of experience with. I started my working career as a software developer in switching software. Most of the businesses that I've run as product manager or general manager have been software-based products. So I've had to work with these kinds of problems for my entire working life. Absolutely, open source development teams is the way to go with just about all this software. There's no question about that. Given the limited resources that the ARL has, there's probably no other way that most of this stuff is going to get done. And you know, modern software developers have gotten the processes around open source software development fine to the point where it provides very high security. You have built-in redundancy, so no one developer that might drop out of the program for whatever reason ends up making it fatal. You have a lot of eyes on the code, which creates a very high-quality product. And most good software development teams that will have open source models have requirements to document their work and support their work as they go. Okay. Now, given what we already know, that the IT budget for the ARL is probably going to be inadequate at best. What other option is there that has a prayer in hell of working? Does anybody know one? What's going to happen is more people like Ray age out and can't support this software anymore. These people put their lives into this work. They're not going to want to just see it fall on the floor and go out of use. Okay. So what's the ARL's role in all this? Maybe is the real question. Well, first of all, the ARL needs to have a good IT environment to run this stuff on. I think the cloud is definitely going to be the way to go, and outsource data centers and so on, so that the precious resources in the league can put their attention on stuff that's real value added, other than having a server in a closet somewhere that they spend their time nursing along. I think that if we get a good person in the IT director role, they should be able to set the stage for creating these kinds of open source programs. A lifelong learning activity or some learning activity by people who have expertise in doing this, so that hams that want to start an initiative like this have some help to do it. There are some great people in New England who are prime candidates. I think you all know of them. Of some of them, people like the gentleman who works on DX Labs and so on, has been advocating strongly in some forums to make Logbook of the World an open source project. So there are hams out there that, if we do the proper outreach work, will engage on this kind of projects. I think that the league and the IT director need to create a good, stable environment where the server sides of these programs have a good place that they can be run cheaply, so that as we evolve some of these products into cloud-based platforms that are sort of server-based models or client-server-based models, which is probably where most everything in software is going to end up going here over time, that it doesn't cost the people who want to run an open source project an arm and a leg to host their solutions. I also think it would be great, I've had several people suggest to me, that the ARL provide a resource for modernizing club websites. There's something called Wild Apricot out there that's a good platform to do this. It's expensive. It would be wonderful if the league created a resource like that that we could all benefit from, because God knows there are 1 or 2 club websites out there that could use a little modernization, right? Anybody know any of those, right? And as far as which platform to support, this is one of the things that open source does a good job of taking care of. Open source people are usually collaborations across a lot of different platforms. If the demand is out there to use a given application on Linux or Mac OS or whatever, the developers will make it work, because that's what they do. And I do think that a broad range of platforms will help. Particularly, Apple is doing some big moves with hardware-based platforms around their new silicon, and you're going to see a lot more applications starting to move to Mac OS, which is basically a Linux underpinned object. So we need to get ourselves in gear and figure out how to support Linux and how to support the Mac, because a lot more people are going to be using those machines.
Thank you both. Those are very comprehensive. That's I'm really glad you addressed them. So now we're going to switch to a topic which we could spend the entire evening and several
Yes,
other
we could.
evenings on and not get to the bottom of it, but we'll try in a short while here. What is your view on the effectiveness of the current tech class license as an entry-level license? What is your position and considered possibilities and details regarding creation of a new, more effective entry-level license? So switching again, Fred, you have it.
All right, great. So as some of you probably know, I've been heavily involved in licensing work for the last probably more than 5 years. Skip and I started a tech class, I remember it well. How long ago was that, Skip?
Spring 2015.
All right, so at least 5 years, probably more like 7, right, or 6. We've since then licensed or upgraded through actual training classes, not just VE exams, over 360 people. We teach 8 license classes every year, Tech General and Extra, every spring and every fall, and 1 to 2 school student-oriented technician classes. We do a lot of work to get to know the people who go through those classes, follow what happens to them, and understand the barriers that keep them from getting on the air. A few years back, we took stock and found out that only 25% of the people we were working so hard to license, 2-day classes, full-time, were ever actually ending up on the air a year later. So I thought, man, we must really be doing something wrong with all of our mentoring programs and stuff. We're screwing up. So I talked to Gordon West, I talked to people at the league, and they thought the number was more like 15%. Okay? We created Ham Boot Camp to address this problem. The last one had 480 people register, and what does it tell us? That 60% of the people that sign up for a basic Get on the Air class had a general, an advanced, or an extra class license. This is several hundred people that are coming to spend a day to find out how to program HTs and put up a 20-meter dipole. So what this tells us is that mentoring, Elmering, whatever you want to call it, is badly broken in this hobby. These people need help. And if we give them that help, we're going to find that whatever licensing we do is going to result in instantly almost in a lot more hams that are active and on the air. I think this is another key role where all of you are a big part of the solution. The ARL needs to do stuff to promote what the license can bring, the activities and the learning. There's a big PR problem here and an outreach problem for sure. But if we do not do the mentoring piece of this well, nothing else we do is really going to matter, because all we're going to do is we're going to license a lot more inactive hams. And you know what? What happens when you license an inactive ham? Once they go out there and they see they can't get on the air, or worse yet, they try to get on the air and don't find that there's anything meaningful that they want to do, you'd never get them back. Never. And so whatever we do around this area, we have to address the mentoring problem first, or we're going to fail again. Now let's talk about the license itself. The work that Tom and others were involved in to expand the tech privileges was right on the mark. You know, I watched that process and lobbied when it was out for comment with the FCC, and I watched a whole bunch of hams belittle it and basically destroy the FCC's motivation to move forward with that. We need to get those people on board, and we need to push that through. There is nothing that will generate more activity in amateur radio, more new ARL membership quickly than to get meaningful HF privileges. You know what happens? I'll tell you a story about a young man. He's 12 years old. He got his tech license. I got him an HTL program set up for the local repeaters. He got on and he said, my radio's broken. Nobody ever answers me. So you know what I had to tell that young man? Go out and study some more and get a general license. Then you can do real stuff that people will talk to you. Fortunately, he did it. Okay? But what would have happened for that young man if he could have gone ahead and do what he ultimately did? He convinced his dad to go out and get him a 7300. I helped them put a 20-meter vertical dipole up in their backyard so that he could get on the air. And you know what? I got a wonderful email with him 3 days later, how excited he was. He worked a station in New Zealand. Okay? That's what effective licensing looks like. You know, and we have this battle going on of, is it about getting the tech stuff done? Is it about having a new class of license? You know what? It's about all of that. There's nothing in that bundle of stuff that we shouldn't be trying to do. Because if we don't do it, in 30 years, most of us that are sitting around this table ain't going to be here anymore. And the question for you is, who will be if we don't? So the mentoring part is fundamental in my mind. Having meaningful privileges, including HF for whatever license is, the entry license is important. And you know what? There's a lot of stuff we can do quickly while we try to figure out if we need a new entry level license, whether that's a different tech, a new license, or whatever it is. But it has to have the right mentoring behind it, and it has to have effective band privileges, or we are not going to move the needle. And if you'd like to talk with some of these people that are in this situation, I'll be glad to arrange an opportunity for you to do that, because they're going to tell you the same thing that I just told you.
Thank you very much, Fred. Bob, you have the floor.
Go for it.
We've lost audio.
They can't hear him.
One of the people on that committee was Bruce, K1BG. Bruce was a really valued contributor to the process. And I think you know Bruce has been talking all around New England about the entry-level license in different ways. He's generated a lot of information about how the novice license changed over the years and went away. And we had a lot of discussions within the committee about whether, as Fred said, there's kind of two paths. One is to make a change to the technician, and the other was push the FCC for another license class that's simpler than the current technician, because the technician license really gives you a lot as a newcomer. It may be too much for a newcomer to be able to run a kilowatt on 432 or microwaves. It's probably certainly too much for an awful lot of people. It would have been too much for me as a kid. So the current technician is complete. It covers a lot of topics, but it's a 250 page book from ARL. There's thinner ones available that have a little less information in them. But for a high school student or a junior high school student, not many of them are walking around saying, oh, look, a 250 page book. I can't wait to read that one. It's an impediment. When my first license was as a novice the license was a kitchen table, 20 or 25 question exam, fairly simple, a little bit on safety, a little bit on FCC rules, and a little bit on operating. But the privileges I got were very simple. They were, at the time, I think 75 watts, crystal controlled, 80, 40, 15 meters, and 2 meters. And my first project was a Heathkit tour, got on the air and talked to somebody in the next town, and that lit the spark. So an entry-level license that's simple is a really important piece of making ham radio something that continues to the next generation. England has done that. Canada has done that to some extent, not quite as much. Australia has done it, and there's several other countries that have fairly basic licenses for fairly basic exams, because the importance of getting on the air and experiencing something in ham radio, maybe a couple of different things, is what actually hooks people into making it either a career or a lifetime pursuit and learning about communications and technology and electronics. So the other direction was to look at the technician license and say, how does that work as an entry-level license? And the answer there was, it's not a good product to sell, not good enough, because not enough people are getting the tech and staying with ham radio. They haven't experienced enough as a result of it. So we talked about change. Right now, technicians can operate 80, 40, and 15 meter CW, which is wonderful. But you don't have to learn CW in order to get a tech license. It's not particularly meaningful to somebody growing up today. So why aren't they allowed to use digital modes? And so that was the other option we gave to the board from the committee, was either a completely new entry license that's very simple, or a change the technician license so that they'd have some privileges at HF that actually might use, like digital modes, and maybe even a little sideband so they could interact with the rest of the hams doing MCOM work on HF. So that went to the FCC 4 years ago, and the FCC has been sitting on it ever since. And as far as I can tell, the ARL has not been pushing the FCC to move that to completion. So that's a whole nother story about pushing the FCC. But anyhow, I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. Okay. And so I think the final question on my list that I had given to both the candidates here And again, this has been referred to a couple of times, I think, in our previous discussions, having to do with the ARL Board of Directors. That body has been accused of micromanaging headquarters staff and usurping the power and responsibility of many of the league's standing committees, as was referred to earlier. What role do you feel the board should play in managing staff and directing standing committees? So again, we'll reverse. So Tom?
So the board should have no role other than hiring the CEO and giving him direction and measuring his results. The board has no place in micromanaging headquarters staff. You can certainly understand that programs are not working well, or understand that members have interactions with staff that are not successful, but that all goes back to the CEO. That doesn't go back to micromanaging a program or micromanaging a staff member in Newington. One of the examples that I like to talk about is currently one of the micromanaging jobs that the board's executive committee does. This is the executive committee is the committee that deals with policy issues theoretically in between board meetings. There's 2 board meetings a year, and the executive committee meets in between times. Well, they've decided that every ARL web story that's posted has to be reviewed by the executive committee. Don't frown. And you think about that. To me, there's no good reason to do that. That means they don't trust the CEO. They don't trust the people in Newington that are writing stories. It means they want to, well, whatever. Let's just say that's the wrong way to go. And it also delays information in getting to members or to the public. So that's strike 1. Strike 2, well, you mentioned here micromanaging league standing committees. There's really only 3 standing committees of the board. There's the executive committee that I described. There's the administration and finance committee that deals with the budget and mostly the financial issues. And then there's the programs and services committee that deals with field organization, DX contests, whatever. But that committee was recently split into 2, so there's a new emergency communications standing committee. The rest of them are, I wouldn't call them standing committees, but they're committees that the board has appointed to do specific tasks, like contest advisory committee, DX advisory committee, and then there's probably a half a dozen or more others. And yes, the board does micromanage some of those. They get together a group of experts on topics, and then they decide that the board then decides that they know better than the experts sometimes, and make some decisions without going back and forth enough with those committees to try to get some kind of resolution. So I'm not happy about that either. The board process tends to not only be micromanaging, but it tends to be very slow because you wait till the next meeting to get something done, and the meetings don't happen often enough. So I think I'll stop there. Maybe Fred will add some to that, but
Great.
I can't disagree with what you've suggested there.
Okay, Fred.
All right. So I've had a lot of experience on both sides of this equation in my working life. My most recent full-time gig was as Chief Technology Officer in a pre-public startup company, about a $700 million a year business, where I had a board to interact with my board members to do my job. So let me tell you what it feels like from the CEO's perspective. Good board members will try to expose the leaders and the senior staff to things that they think they might want to look at, but mostly what they're going to do is a few things. They're going to hire the leader. They're going to have a hand in selecting some of the senior staff members, but that's advise and consult. Those are the CEO's calls. And they make sure that there's adequate budget and resources to hire qualified, top-notch people, which, by the way, I don't believe our current board understands how to do properly, which is one of the reasons we missed the mark on some key hires like IT and PR. Okay? And one of the other things they do, which is really important, is they set up a structure to hold the CEO and the senior staff members accountable for their actions and their results and how they do their job, and then they do that. And if they don't perform, you get a chance to correct, and if you don't correct, you're gone. That's how it should look. okay? This business of mucking around, if the executives committee's job is to bridge between board meetings, maybe we shouldn't have an executive committee, because it seems to me that that whole model is upside down. And you know what? The question the board needs to be asking is, if you're doing that, who's doing your job? I'm serious. Who's worried about the vision and the future of amateur radio and the ARL? Shouldn't the board be doing that? Who's thinking about what's the best approach to attract more amateurs and trying to bring the necessary PR and licensing changes and other things about? Who's doing that? Who's working on creating better public relations and support for amateur radio? Isn't that a big problem that the board ought to be worried about? Who's doing that? Okay. I think that this whole committee process, and we're not going to get rid of it and so on, part of the issue is we got a lot of folks on the boards who are hands-on people who maybe haven't had the experience of being in a large board setting or been an officer in a corporation and don't understand how to approach this. And they feel like they got to help and they want to help. And you got to give them credit for that. But somehow, and this is something I believe with the experience I have may help me to impress on people a little bit, is that if we can get about doing the staff's job and the CEO job and focus on the real job that the board should be doing, which is the big issues, then I think maybe we can actually solve some of these problems and we can get out of this mode where we're second guessing each other. The other problem is, anybody ever had a boss who was in their shorts all the time while they were trying to do their job? We've all had one of those, right? How much risk do you take to make things better when somebody's watching over your shoulder all the time? How much are you willing to try something different that maybe you never tried before to see if you can make things better? How much are you going to hang yourself out and put 125% into your work if you feel like you're going to get trumped on, if you get crossways with some director somewhere who's got an agenda? What kind of work environment does that behavior create for people? Not a very good one, especially in a situation where there's a lot of problems that need to be solved, and we need some innovative solutions that can best come from the people who are doing this stuff every day. So yes, I think the board's micromanaging. The real challenge is how do we get them out of that trap and into the stuff they really need to be doing? And I think I can help with that. I've had some experience with it.
All right, thank you both very much. I really appreciate the answers to the questions. I think at this point, if anyone online has sort of an audible, if the two,
Phil, there's a couple of comments in the chat.
oh,
And also, we may want to change the view and go to the Hollywood Squares.
we'll do that. So,
Does anybody
pardon
have-
me,
That'd be good. We can see the people
gentlemen.
too here, so that'll be
Exactly.
great.
So
Yep.
let's do that for the moment. Okay, so there is the Rogues Gallery, and then here is the chat. So we could start with that. Well, Mike needs to be closer. Okay.
I think we got
That
that
is
one.
not quite, in fact, I think most of the chat comments appear to
Those
be
are earlier.
just technical. Okay, so if you guys would entertain an audible
Sure,
from
absolutely.
the audience? Great. Does anyone online have a particular question? Floor is open.
There's got to be something you don't think we get.
Must have been something we didn't cover. I know this is comprehensive, but.
Somebody's trying and not coming through.
Check if you're trying to speak, check your mute. Yes. Wave your hand. All right, I'll give you a moment to think of one. I'm going to go to the room here. Does anyone have an audible question in the room that they'd like to ask either of the candidates?
This is an easy one.
Dennis, and we'll repeat it for the feed, so go ahead.
In 9/11, we had such a terrible disaster. There was only ham radio that got through in the first couple of days.
Yeah.
They were, the connection point. Puerto Rico, we had a devastating hurricane that wiped out most of the island, and it was ham radio that flowed through. We had Hurricane Ida that just came through a couple of weeks ago, and ham radio again was the muster call for everybody who needed help. But you don't hear much about that in the PR. You don't hear that on national news. I want to see the ARL hop on that. I want that in front page news. I want somewhere where they're going to really come through. Second thing is, I grew up when 11 meters was a ham band. I operated 11 meters. And you say now today, 2021, I am a ham, CB, I know just what you're talking about. And they have such a discouraging picture of who you are. CB 10-4, good buddy, Roger Buck, and it's not true. we are a whole lot better. And we need a PR that is simply gonna go above and beyond whatever image there is for CB radio. I love it, I operated it, and it's not what CB is today, it's not what ham radio is.
Okay, so let me repeat that for the feed. Essentially, it has to do with public relations, both in disaster assistance that ham radio is doing, and also in the misconception that the behavior on the 11-meter band and CB folks is equivalent to the amateur radio population. So I would like, maybe Fred, you could start by addressing that particular comment, and then Tom, you can
Sure,
have a crack.
and I'll throw one more in there too. How many times have we heard that, oh, that amateur radio thing, does anybody do that anymore? Right? God, I want to jump across the room when I hear that. So these are all issues about public support and awareness for amateur radio, Dennis. That's the fundamental thing that I think is behind everything that you brought up. So let's talk about how we fix that. The only way we're going to do that is to put amateur radio in front of the general public in a positive light. And there's lots of different ways to do that. The PR role, which we've been talking about and complaining or lamenting about not being filled, is a key play with that. But we all have a big role to play as well. You know, I've had a lot of opportunity to do work with ARIS contacts in schools. I'm part of the ARIS program. I'm a ground station in Mentor. I've touched about 11 schools worldwide in different capacities with this program. Every single one time we do that, there are 100 or more parents, sometimes 500 or 600 parents, school teachers, school boards. I've even seen Congress people in these contacts. Every time we engage in a school, we do two really important things. One is we take a percentage of the kids there and we inspire them to do something great with their lives. Not all of them are going to be amateur radio operators, but I'll bet there's at least half of you in this room that have a positive story how amateur radio and your involvement in it made a difference in your life, okay? But you know what else happens there? You impress the value of amateur radio and what it can do on hundreds of people when you do that. You know, some of you will remember that associated with the National Club, we did a first ISS contact in a middle school over in Hudson. There were about 400 people in that room. And you know, if I had to go back to that town and get 50 people to go to a town meeting to get an HOA, a town of protection bill passed, I could have done it in a heartbeat. Activities like that, and these are things that all of us have to do. The league can help here, and the PR role is important. But if we're not out, and you know, you do your thinking days on the air, I just saw that you guys had another one. I saw a nice picture of some of the stuff you were doing. When you engage in those kind of activities, that's one way we make public support. What you're saying, Dennis, about awareness of the good work that was done around the hurricanes is another way. We should be publicizing that every way we possibly can. You know, at Field Day, if you put young people in your new hams first, bring a TV station out. We had WMUR come out and cover our Field Day a few years back, and I bet you at least 50,000 people saw a whole bunch of young people, and the news people were marveling over how we had 13-year-old kids doing emergency communications drills. So we got to get creative with public awareness and support for amateur radio. It is critically important on so many fronts. It's important on engaging new people to get in the hobby. It's important to protecting our spectrum. It's important to getting legislation passed. And it's important to get the general public to appreciate and value what we do so they'll support us.
Tom?
Well, Fred and I agree.
We
On
don't
that.
disagree on a lot,
I
actually.
know. I'll say ditto. It's incredibly important for us to tell our own story, like I said earlier, to our own members and to the rest of the ham community and to the general public. Now, each of those requires a different approach. We've got publications we can get to our own members, but we have to have contacts and distribution methods to get information to the general media. And a good public relations manager has that. And the more experienced that person is, the better they're going to be able to do that job. The current job that's advertised, I think, is at $64,000. And Fred and I were talking before the meeting outside, and Fred was talking about 150. I don't know that it's that much, but it's not $64,000 for an experienced, quality public relations person that knows how to both write the stories, find the people to interview, find the quotes, and get the information in the hands of people that can do magic for us in terms of publicity. They know who to contact at magazines, they know who to contact on other websites and blogs. There's a lot of stories to tell. In fact, if you go out there and look in a lot of places, there's a lot of stories that hams are already telling that are doing quite well at publicizing amateur radio. But it's not very organized to highlight ARL's role in some of that. And the ARL really does have a role as a national organization and the main entity that interacts with FCC and Congress when we decide to do it. So it's incredibly important that we do that kind of thing on a regular basis. You can't just, it's just inexcusable to go 18 months without a PR manager for any reason. You know, whether it was the interim CEO or the new CEO, that should have been I think the new CEO actually wrote the job description and made the job pay a little less than the previously advertised job. So I hope we're going the right direction there when he does hire somebody. But I agree with you, Dennis. This is a story we can't afford not to tell. So, thank you.
I think every club should have their special PR guy who's gonna, pass it
Right,
on.
and that's why there's a public relations program, PIO, PIC, within the field organization, which has also been kind of ignored the last few years.
This is also an opportunity for the training resources to help clubs get better at doing this kind of work on their own as well. I think that's a huge opportunity.
And I can guarantee you, at $64K, you're going to get a part-time person. Who else is going to apply to that kind of
Right,
job,
that's right,
really?
that's ridiculous.
I mean, you've immediately limited your candidate pool, right there.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Ralph has his hand up.
Ah, yes, I was going to ask if we had anybody from online. It looks like Ralph. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you, Fred, for donating your evening to us. Fred's comment and Tom, I have to turn.
You're breaking up a little bit.
Okay. Maybe I'll stop my video. Maybe that'll help with the breakup. I don't know if it's my internet bandwidth or the echo, but I hope you can still hear me. Fred's comment and Tom's follow made me think of an opportunity that we have just within the division. So this club did an ARIS contact a long time ago. I've totally lost track of time. Maybe WNXP remembers when he was one of the leaders of that. So we did an ARIS contact, and we didn't have the benefit of some of the resources you've described, Fred, with really having skill sets to do all of the media outreach that that the Nashua Club did. So one of the opportunities that we have within the division, and I hope whichever of the two of you wins the election, I suspect the third candidate doesn't have a chance, at least I hope not. But anyway, whichever of the two of you wins the election, I hope that one of the things we can do is spread the skill set that exists within the division around a bit, so that clubs like ours who don't have the benefit of someone like Nashua apparently has, who have superb media relationships, that we can do some of these things that Newington can't do PR for every club, and every club can't do PR for itself. But where we have resources in the division to help each other, I hope that our next division director can help clubs share those around a little bit.
All set.
I'll take that one first, Tom. So I've been a club person and working through clubs for the last, 6-7 years. And I put a lot of my personal time and almost all my energy into this. I believe that clubs and individual amateur radio people who are experts in certain area are the key to solving most of these problems. That's one of the things that's a little different about me than most directors. See, most directors are very focused on doing stuff inside the ARL, because that's the world that the director job is defined in, okay? And that's important, and it's really essential that we do that. But I also believe that you should have a director who's going to work problems across the division at the same time. So let me tell you how I'm going to do that. I'm going to appoint 4 assistant directors to work on exactly the stuff that you brought up and work across groups to share good ideas, get clubs and other people to work together and solve real problems. We're going to have 1 assistant director that's responsible for Newham outreach and development. That's going to be about licensing, mentoring, getting on the air, trying to get people lobbied to get the entry license fixed, all of that stuff. We're going to have a second director who's responsible, assistant director who's responsible for bringing amateur radio into schools and taking all the good work, including some of the things that your club are doing, and trying to spread those ideas out and maybe build some joint activities. We want to get people up to speed on ARIS contacts and all the media-related stuff that's so important in those environments. I'm going to appoint a 3rd assistant director who's going to worry about emergency communications and public service. We have some of the best capabilities in ARIS, NTS, and other areas in New England that there are anywhere. And if we can't bring those activities together and create some world-class programs with this base, I don't know where in the heck it can be done. And then the 4th assistant director is going to be about promoting spectrum use and protection. And that job's going to be about trying to get some of these bands lit up before we lose them, and to try to get the ham community involved in lobbying and some of the stuff that might make a difference to actually protect that stuff. So I am very much about taking the knowledge and spreading out. And just in case anybody was worried, I am on record as resigning as president of the National Area Radio Society. I will not take that job again, whether or not I'm elected. That decision is made. And the reason I'm doing that is for 2 reasons. First of all, I need time to actually do the stuff that I'm talking about. And it's going to be a hell of a lot of work. And I expect to be pretty much working on it 24/7, 7 days a week. It's how I've done everything I've done in amateur radio my professional life from day one. And you have my commitment that if you choose me to do this work, that you will get everything I know how to give. The other reason I'm doing that is I don't want there to be any question where my loyalties lie. Okay? Nashua's a pretty big club. It's been pretty successful. I've had a pretty big hand in creating that, and I'm proud of it. It was a lot of work and a lot of pretty creative stuff. But you know, if you all are going to believe that I'm all about doing this stuff for you all, I can't be associated with any one club. Because there are always going to be people who will question where my loyalties lie if I do that. Okay? So yes, doing this work, solving the problem, sharing the knowledge, those are all great things we can do in New England. I don't know how quickly we can fix the board process. It's pretty broken. But I'm damn sure we can make a difference here. And I wouldn't be running if I didn't believe that.
Thank you, Fred. Tom?
Yep.
Okay, I think I just heard your closing campaign statement.
It was part of it.
It was good.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Appreciate that from a pro.
Sharing information is something we're supposed to be good at. We talk to each other on the air a lot, we share a lot of stuff, but non-ham radio communication is something we're not as good at. And it's certainly something that ARL is not an A+ at. And over the last few years, I mentioned, as I think part of the last question, that we just haven't done well at supporting the field organization in general. And the field organization is not just emergency communications or public relations. There's a bunch of different roles within the field organization. And that the staffing in Newington to support clubs and the field organization has been very limited over the last several years, maybe even 10 or 12 years for that matter. I know they just hired somebody to deal with clubs in particular. Mike W8ZY, who's from West Danbury, Connecticut, was hired about 3 months ago now. Was this SEC in Connecticut and has a pretty extensive IT background. He worked for Microsoft. And he's working now doing lots of Zoom calls with clubs around the country to try to work on ways to share information between clubs. So I would say, in addition to what Fred has talked about, there is a role within Newington to facilitate some of that activity. And Newington can, like we've said before, Newington can't do it all. Clubs and individuals have to take on some of it themselves, but Newington can help with best practices, sharing information among clubs that are successful at certain things, and there's lots of different clubs, and lots of clubs have different expertise. That information, if it's shared, is very valuable. But somebody's got to actually help to share it, and not all clubs are very good at getting that information out there. So that's a very important role that ARL itself should work on, and needs the resources to do it well. And we keep talking about the jobs that are not being done well because we haven't paid enough, or we don't have hired people in place. All of that takes money, and I'm sure that has been part of the reason why we're critical of some programs. Because it's fairly easy to look around and say, well, I know we can do that because all we have to do is spend $80,000 and get somebody who's good at it to do it. And so ARL's limited. It's limited by what we get from membership dues, it's limited by advertising income, and it's limited by publication sales. Now, Dennis, you mentioned publications, and that's an important piece. At some point, like with most magazines in the world, they're going to hit the edge of the cliff and fall off. Magazines have not done well in the last 10 or 15 years. ARL's done okay for some reason. We've done it, and the right things to make QST attractive enough to be the prime membership, the prime thing people think of when they join ARL, in addition to spectrum protection. But over time, we've moved slowly into electronic media, digital publications, social media, and things like that. But we're a laggard when it comes to that. We're not front and center, and some of that is just because of resources, but some of that is because we know we have to put resources there, and the question is, what are the priorities? I know that that's a difficult decision made every year as the league's budget gets put together in the fall and looked at by the board committees and the board in the January meeting. It never satisfies everybody, but
Good budget still.
but that's the way they should work.
That's right.
But anyhow, I guess back to your particular comment about publications, Dennis. I think it's important that we continue to move more towards an electronic view of how we're going to provide information, and I think what the league has done over the past 5 years to make a beginner's magazine available has been a very important thing.
It's been a good move.
The Fred that's not here keeps talking about how you can get QST, the beginner's magazine, or QEX, the experimenter's magazine, or NCJ, the contest magazine, but you don't have a choice of all four. You only have a choice of QST or the beginner's magazine. The other two you get electronically, which is good. And I think that's a great membership benefit because we've made them available electronically. And for membership now, not only do you get QST, but you also get the other three electronically. And so that's part of doing things electronically, is you don't incur the costs of all the printing and mailing costs. So it's much less expensive to do things electronically. On the other hand, you run the risk of cannibalizing your advertisers. And so that's the downside of that, is how do you make that balance? Have we done it right? I don't know. The fourth major area for ARL income is donations and bequests, and we've, starting 20 years ago, we started to get much more serious about that. We're still not doing it well, but that's another important source for income, because there's a lot of hams that have a lot of benefit they've gotten from their life as a ham and involving ARL, and they want to give back, and we've got to make that attractive. And they have to know where their money goes. It's, as we were talking earlier about not knowing where your donation goes or not knowing where something goes, if you know how the league or the ARL Foundation is going to use your money, you're much more likely to make that donation and or gift to the league. So, long way around an answer to your question, but good question. Thank you.
All right, I would entertain one more question, because it is actually after 2100 local time, and These two have been very, very generous with their time. Is there anyone who online or even in the room that might have a question?
Go back to the,
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. The main video feed had stopped working, so I switched to the secondary laptop feed, which you're staring at right now. So if someone could check the other video feed.
probably ran out of battery.
All righty, thank you. So does anyone else have a final question? Online, we'll start with online. Okay, anyone in the room?
Good job.
Excellent. Bill, so we have one more question from Bill K1NS.
I already have a question, something you know about. Over the years, hams have had so much influence over the development of radio. I mean, single sideband, HF propagation, the list goes on and on of things that we have developed by being hams. And I've always felt that both the FCC and industry in the past viewed us as a resource because there's so many things we supply to them. This is free research in other words. I'm wondering if, and we're not telling that story. I don't see that story in favor of being told anywhere. I'm just offering you as to offer a good reason not to give away a 5 and 10 gig spectrum is because that's the place people are out there actively researching now.
Yeah, just to repeat for the feed, Bill was mentioning that hams have played a critical role in doing radio technology development sort of in past decades. And the question is, why shouldn't we continue to promote that to agencies like FCC, NTIA, et cetera, and that it also may make a case for retaining occupancy in the bands.
Yeah.
So I'll let you two comment on that.
I'll go first.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think this is the key part of how we retain our SSA, our super high frequency bands, 5 gig, 10 gig, 47 gig, all those bands are going to be under siege. But we actually have to do the innovating. You know, one of the things that's been a challenge is that we've gotten a little bit stagnant on our ability to embrace new technology. You know, a great example of this is the whole fight over FT8 and so on. A lot of people hate it. They think it's ruining amateur radio. You know, for lack of a better term, I think it's a wonderful gateway drug. I think it's a good way to get a young ham, a new ham, who maybe doesn't have a great station on the air, especially if we manage to get the tech updated, to add some meaningful digital privileges, and have them truly have an amazing amateur radio experience. You know, I've worked with a lot of these people that do that. They don't stop with FT8 if they really love this hobby. They go off and they try sideband, and they get on new bands, and they might build a satellite station, or they'll do something else, because that's what makes amateur radio such an inviting hobby. That no matter how much hard you try, and God, those of you who know my station know I've tried just about everything you can do from 160 up through and including 1.2 gig. There's a few I'm missing, but I'm filling them in. And you know, about the time I get done with one thing, something new like Q65 or something else comes along and there's something new to try. That's one of the things that makes this hobby so very, very special. And you know, when we talk about things like mesh data networking applications in 5 gig and so on, not only are those things that we should be doing to protect our spectrum, but those are things we should be doing in the context of places like the FCC TAC. Did you know there's a study group that's about to be launched there to look at reasonable ways to share spectrum across multiple users on 5 gig and above? Don't you think the amateur radio community ought to have a seat at that table at the TAC where that policy is going to get made? We got to get about being innovative again. And we got to stop stomping on things that aren't the way we always did them and start to embrace some of this new stuff again. Because that's how we're going to establish our value, at least part of it going forward. Tom?
Oh, any comments to add?
Yeah, add a couple of things. Fred mentioned the new Technical Advisory Committee. I believe ARL is recommending somebody, I think it is Greg.
Yeah, I know Greg well from the time I was on the TAC.
Yeah, N9GL.
He's a good guy.
So that is important. And we've got some very qualified people in the amateur community to recommend to study committees that are national and international. We've got some great people involved with the International Amateur Radio Union, and we play a big part in the technical discussions that happen and the political discussions that happen there at the World Radio Conferences. So it's absolutely important to identify people and find ways to engage them. The other area, Bill, which is kind of interesting of technology, there's two areas of technology that I think hams can particularly play a part. And one is, one of the things that industry never has enough of is qualified RF engineers. And the ability to have ham radio in a college environment is really important for practical reasons, because hams are practical. Some would call us cheap, but we're also practical. I mean, how do you do something at low cost? And if you had all the money in the world, it wouldn't be as much fun. If you try to do something and you can find ways to do it with reasonable costs, what you've learned is how to be good in a business, to know how to make something work and not make it overly complicated to build or to repair. Second area, which has surprised me recently, is that one of the big jobs that's going to be in great need in the next 5-10 years is people that do tower climbing. Think about that. With all of the rollout of technology, change to 5G, and what did I hear today? 50G or something? It just blew my mind. But anyhow,
6G,
there's going to be
6G, there's a 7G.
yeah, there's stuff coming.
3GPP is working on all
But
the speeds.
all of that stuff requires some antennas, some a little smaller than others and a little lower than others. But tower climbing is actually an area where a ham could really have a big impact in knowing how to build things, how to do them right, and have a pretty interesting career. Hey, you can repair windmills too, I suppose, for solar farms. So, but that's another area, and so amateur radio should play a part in all of those businesses in some way as part of the learning grounds for how to do some of that stuff. So we've got to make that connection for people so they understand that ham radio can be important for a career in a lot of different areas. And not everybody has to be a technical guru. You can certainly learn a lot in ham radio by being a historian or being an anthropologist. I mean, there's communications is important in any profession, and knowing how to do a little of it makes a lot of difference. And what I always tell people is, go to your local town, get on a board or commission, even if it's the sewer commission. Get on one of the boards or commissions, get to know who the players are, show that you have some expertise in communications in some way, and somewhere along the way, you'll find that that's a useful step to have taken so that people know who you are, and that when it comes time for you to put up that antenna that's taller than what you have, you might have somebody in town that understands what the value is of amateur radio to the community. So.
Won't be anybody in this room.
I climbed towers.
All right, I wanted to thank everybody for the questions, and I did promise each of these gentlemen to have maybe a minute or two just to sum up at the end. And so Fred, I'd like you to
go
close up
first.
first, and
All
then
right.
Tom will do that, and then we'll thank everybody. So go ahead.
All right. So I think that it's important that we engage all of you in solving these problems. You know, one of the points we made really well tonight is that the ARL doesn't have enough resources to do this stuff by themselves. Oh, okay, sure. The ARL does not have enough resources, enough people, enough money to solve these problems alone. They can provide frameworks, they can provide publicity, they can do PR work, they can do a lot of healthy stuff. But if we don't solve the problems and work together to do that, they ain't gonna get solved. And you know, one of the things I've learned, this is my 22nd club meeting since June 15th. So I've spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people, trying to understand what's on their minds. And you know, people aren't happy. Henry Ford, to paraphrase, said, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're gonna get what you got. And I don't think we're too happy with what we got. So don't you think it's time to try something new? Maybe get all of you involved in addition to the board and the people in Newington to try to solve some of these problems. Maybe, you know what? what's the worst that could happen? We're gonna go faster. We're gonna make a lot of the mistakes and learn as we go. Maybe we could get some of those committee processes inside the league to pay attention and actually help them get it right quicker and more efficiently. And you know the biggest thing we gain when we do this kind of dual approach that I'm advocating? At the end of the day, you all are bought in to take it forward because it's your solution. It's not some committee on a board somewhere made up of directors that don't even answer to you and don't tell you what they're doing. And I really believe, I've seen a lot of tough problems get solved. I've solved some on my own in my world with the Nashua Club. And I can tell you it's all about getting people engaged and being part of the solution. That's how you create great programs, that's how you solve problems. And you know what? Your director should be accountable for doing that, even if it means they gotta take some risk and try some new things. And you should expect that from them, you should hold them accountable for it. And I hope if you choose me, you'll hold me accountable.
Thank you, Brett. Tom? Perfect.
Okay. Ooh, that's a bright light behind me. Oh, well.
It's a halo.